Napoleon Dynamite is yet another game based on a movie that is made up of a series of minigames which all revolve around the events of the film. The main issue with the experience is that all of the tasks which are asked of the player are mind-numbingly boring, from dragging an action figure behind a bus to feeding a llama known as Tina. But before we get too deep into the infuriating parts of the game, I'll make a quick mention of what the game does get right, mainly the art style, and though it's unconventional, it's actually fairly well done. The game looks like someone took still pictures of the various objects and settings in the movie, cut them out and pasted them all back together using glue. It has an early South Park charm to it, though the characters are a bit creepy. But overall the game looks and sounds pretty good, but it all falls apart when it's actually played. Right off the bat, the minigames are ridiculously difficult. Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't minigames usually short, simple distractions? If so, Napoleon Dynamite is no minigame collection. These games are crazy difficult. Unfortunately, most of the other activities you'll find yourself doing involve reusing the same mechanics over and over again, but in a different setting. The football game shares a mechanic with a bow and arrow game, as well as several variations on horizontal shooters that just come off as lazy on behalf of the developers. At the end of the day, instead of Napoleon Dynamite feeling like a true extension of the film, it ends up just coming across as a cheap cash grab collection of minigames that are about as much fun as walking in front of a car. This is one to avoid. The Golden Compass is a game based on a movie which itself was based on a book. If you're at all familiar with the source material, the game sees you taking on the part of Lyra, who's trying to seek out her friend Roger and save him from the clutches of evil kidnappers known as the Gobblers. The gameplay is just a fucking mess, and that's putting it lightly. There are so many ideas in play that it feels like a game struggling to find an identity. The main part being exploration itself. You spend an absurd amount of time just wandering around the world, fulfilling mundane tasks that add absolutely nothing to the adventure. It feels like an absolute chug to get through. Platforming is another area which makes up most of the Golden Compass. The problem being that much like everything else it attempts, it never delivers. To be fair, there are some solid ideas when it comes to this aspect of the game, such as the grappling hook that makes traversal a bit more engaging, but the loose controls and abysmal level design practically halt you right in your tracks. The icing on the cake has to be the over-reliance on QuickTime events though. From jumping to combat and navigation, there's always something popping up on the screen, which just goes to further pull you out of the experience and create yet another layer of annoyance as you make your way through it. There's several other aspects in play, such as Lyra's ability to deceive other characters, which just results in frustration and likely another reason to hate yourself even more for buying it in the first place. But what hits it home is the completely random loading that just comes out of nowhere. You'll be walking through the level and bam, you're hit with an up to 10-second wait just to be able to carry on. And this can be seriously annoying. It can happen mid-jump or mid-attack, and rather than just freeze the on-screen view, the game cuts away to a black screen with a loading symbol. It is guaranteed to annoy the shit out of anyone playing, and it's a shame as what starts out quite competently soon devolves into a complete and utter mess that will likely be too boring to hold anyone's interest. Kazook is essentially a party game that wears its inspiration on its sleeve, mainly the WarioWare series, and much like that game, Kazook consists of various activities that usually last between 2 minutes to 20-second bursts of play. The difference being that they're all about as inspired as a YouTube apology video. There's 30 of them in total, which results in an unfortunate lack of variety, and when coupled with the absolute schizophrenic way the game is structured, what you're left with is an absolute miserable nightmare. You start off with a few of them unlocked, including an alien abduction pick-em-up, a shooter, and a studio that sees you having to bleep out profanity on the radio. If you actually survive going through them without wanting to die, you'll come face to face with the progression system that will likely be the push over the edge. You see, in order to unlock more minigames, you need to earn up to $10,000 of in-game currency. The problem being is that your place on the scoreboard dictates the amount of money you win. For example, 10th would be $1,000, whereas 9th would be $2,000 and so on. But just playing a minigame nets you $100, which completely negates the competitive nature of each game, as you can just slowly progress with no sort of challenge. Now you know me, when it comes to games I try to give each and every one I cover a fair shake. So are there any positives? Well, it didn't crash. Most of the games can seemingly be played in multiplayer, although most sane people won't have the guts to inflict this on their friends. In all seriousness though, when it comes to visuals, Kazook is actually quite impressive. There's a nice level of detail, especially in each of the environments. It's a real shame as it's clear to see that a fair amount of work has clearly gone into the game, but the actual act of playing it just can't keep up with the effort that was poured into it. On the surface, party games seem like they are easy to create, but without the right ingredients and more importantly heart, atmosphere and fun but fair gameplay, you're just pissing in the wind and ultimately bringing something entirely pointless to market. When it comes to racing games on the PSP, there's an absolute ton of great examples, from Ridge Racer to Gran Turismo and Burnout, but just like everything good, there's always something is equally as bad. This is where Pocket Racers comes in, and offers up a somewhat primitive take on the Mario Kart formula. It all starts out with you having an incredibly wild party. Well, that's what the instruction manual says. If the CG intro was anything to go by, it was actually paint-dryingly dull. Whilst talking to your friends, a mysterious hooded figure enters the room and promptly transforms you all into a range of generic Hot Wheels knockoffs. As now just a cog in the wicked bastard's plan, you've now got to race and avoid losing, otherwise Satan himself will claim your soul. To be fair, as far as intros to racing games go, that's pretty fucking whacked out. But despite it sounding kind of cool, the game just never delivers and feels like an absolute joke instead. First off, the racing itself, which all takes place in your messy but otherwise normal house, where you have to dodge such nightmarish obstacles such as cups, books and pens. For a game involving the literal devil himself, you would have thought they might have gotten a bit more creative with the setting. When it comes to gameplay, it's just as uninspired. Like I mentioned, it borrows from Mario Kart and allows the player to take advantage of several items. From shields to rockets and turbo boosts, there's a nice amount of variety when it comes to the options on hand, but executing them is another matter entirely. The rockets have all the power and finesse of a fart, whilst the turbo boost barely feels as if it even affects your speed. When you couple this with the shockingly terrible level design, which mainly consists of a lot of ramps, which might have been decent if it wasn't for the ultra sensitive controls that make you flip over and skid across the track, which just so happens to reset your position, oftenly pointing you straight at the fucking wall. Is this game playable? For sure it is, but you'll resent having to go through the damn thing. Aside from the inclusion of Satan, this is just a run-of-the-mill racer that feels more like a college project gone wrong rather than a full-blown game. At this point, everyone and their dog are aware of Marvel, whether our superheroes are scaling tall buildings, catching crooks like flies, or slicing through steel with their claws. Most admire their powers that are unhindered by the restrictions that hold the rest of us back, and this pretty much sums up the main issue with Rise of the Imperfects. There are severe limitations on how, and more importantly for how long you have access to your abilities, which all but manage to sap any sort of fun out of the title before even having a chance to get it running. Now, it's essentially a brawler that sees up to 20 characters making the cut, but for some odd reason only 12 are actually part of the Marvel cast, with the rest of them being made up of EA's own ideas for superheroes, which are about as charismatic as a wet mop. The initial footage before release was actually quite promising, with all of them ducking it out and unleashing their superpowers and smashing up everything in sight as they go. But upon booting the game up and getting to sit down with it, you soon realise that when it comes to gameplay, it's a pretty bare bones experience. You'll enjoy the thrill of picking up an abandoned taxi and hurling it towards your opponent, and will optimistically believe that the apparent lack of moves is solely down to your lack of practice with the controls. But most of all, you'll slowly feel the growing despair as it becomes clearer and clearer that those few moves are pretty much all you've got. Overall, Rise of the Imperfects has actually got some pretty decent ideas going for it. It was just a shame that the brain-dead decision to artificially prolong what was already a pretty mundane affair to unlock new fighters made the cut, as well as the fundamentally flawed and joyless experience of actually playing the game. Avoid it like the fucking plague. After the somewhat half-baked, completely nonsensical version that released on the PS2, you'd think the developers would have learned their lesson and actually improved on the many aspects that hindered the PlayStation 2 release. Not only is it essentially the same game on PSP, but they actually managed to make it even worse. Let's begin with the core of the game, the fighting. Unfortunately, it's very basic, with little variety outside of the standard punch and kick. Other than the sidestep feature that can be used during battle, the game plays just like a 2D fighter, although in 3D. Think of it as a sort of watered down version of Dragon Ball Z Budokai without the ability to fly. Each of the characters comes equipped with a few combos and simple attacks, but a good chunk of the combos are basically performed the same way no matter what character is chosen. Punch forward, then alternate between punch and kick to finish the combo. The attacks and combos are different per character, so there is some variety in the way they look, but not much in the way to perform them. The characters themselves can transform into mythical warriors once their super gauge is completely full, kind of like Bloody Roar, only the characters change to bigger human warriors instead of animals. Whilst transformed, each of them take off more damage per hit and have a total of 3 super attacks. These super attacks often include a button tapping minigame, which sees the player spamming the on-screen button in order to perform it. Now, one of the best aspects of a fighting game has to be the characters themselves. It gives the developers a chance to inject a bit of personality or charm into their game, but unfortunately, Legend of the Dragon swing and misses over and over again. They all just seem to blend into each other and never stand out, regardless of who you play, as they're all just as lifeless as the last. Even fans of the series will find nothing to like here, except for maybe the bonus episode, but that is hardly worth the purchase price of the game. If you're looking for a solid fighting game on the PSP, this is not it. When it comes to RPGs, there's an established formula that many often fall into. The cliche beginning of a young boy leaving their village and setting off into the wilderness to experience a coming-of-age story is about as common as a Starbucks on the high street. Of course, there are some exceptions, and those RPGs usually stand out due to them effectively subverting the usual tropes, with solid writing or fighting mechanics that place it above the rest. Astonisher's Story is no exception, and is easy to distinguish from the sea of RPGs on the PSP, not because it introduces a new take on the cliché or spices up the usual conventions, but because it executes every common trope so incredibly poorly. If, like any other sane person, you were hoping for the narrative to have some type of coherency, then you'll be surely disappointed. While it might be possible to overlook some of the more questionable aspects of the story, as this is a conversion of a game that originally came out in Korea in 1994, but what can't be forgiven is the disastrous translation. Characters are inappropriately named, for example, Man 2 and Soldier 1. Nearly every attempt at humour falls flat on its ass through misused words, and the character building and narrative becomes, if not totally unintelligible, then certainly irrelevant through the confusion all of this stirs up. Now, many RPGs live or die on their battle system alone. An Astonisher's Story might as well be 6 feet deep, as not only is the system woefully underbaked, but completely tedious as a result. To top it all off though, the final insult is the loading times, which constantly interrupt nearly every aspect of the game, even your fucking attacks during battle. To sum it up in one word, Astonisher's Story is a load of bollocks, and is something that should just simply not exist. Now, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had to be one of my favourite franchises growing up. From the original movies to the games on the Super Nintendo, I just couldn't get enough of it. Naturally, as I grew up, I began to care less and less about it, but on the off chance, a few good years back, I decided to pick this game up on the PSP and try to relive some of those memories. For fuck's sakes, what a mistake that was. The game can best be described as a series of nonsensical missions that involve leaping from ledge to ledge. Oh, and you might fight something in between your jumps, but that's not a promise. As I mentioned earlier, all you'll be doing is a shit ton of jumping that you cannot even control the trajectory of. You get different colored cues that tell you where and which height of jump to use to reach different surfaces. You cannot interact with anything, and at times makes the game feel like it's playing itself, breaking up the absolute hell that is general gameplay as several boss encounters which finally allow you a bit more freedom as to what you can actually do. Instead of just having to mash the X button in the general direction of the enemy, you get to dodge and perform counterattacks that add a bit of flair to the otherwise mundane combat. But on the whole, the new additions are practically useless, as the lack of difficulty will see you mashing X anyway, as it's quicker and more effective than actually waiting to get struck. To be fair, the game looks pretty impressive on the PSP. Both the animations and environments look great on the small screen, but unfortunately the cutscenes and dialogue help it fall flat. The stills and motionless scenes feel so out of place, and with the great in-game animation, you're led to wonder why in the hell didn't they just go with the engine instead. It's a strange decision that never really made sense to me, as it would have added a lot more to the overall presentation of the game. Overall, this is just one shockingly terrible PSP game that should stay where it deserves, in the fucking sewers. Dragoneer Zarya was developer Hitmaker's second attempt at the RPG genre, first being the ill-fated Blade Dancer, a mediocre PSP title that didn't quite get it. And indeed, Dragoneer Zarya delivers an offering what Blade Dancer didn't have. It has a full-fledged storyline with plenty of twists, a decent plot of developed characters, and little improvements here and there that don't change much in the end, but at least it's there. However, despite the additions made to the presentation, the gameplay and overall end result still suffers a great deal. It's a mixed bag of good and bad, but in the end, the bad really outweighs the good. To begin, there's a severe amount of style over substance, which really hurts the overall journey. You see, this is the fundamental problem with the game. It's all deception. You start off thinking it's this really epic RPG involving dragons, spells and whatnot, but it's all just an appearance. The game looks really good, the 3D graphics are sharp, clear and vibrant, the characters have a great art style, and the environments are fairly varied as well. However, the animations are just shocking. They are used over and over again in all of the cutscenes, adding no particular charm to the already somewhat stale storyline. This only goes to show that Hitmaker probably didn't have a very high budget for this project, which is understandable after something like Blade Dancer. When it comes to gameplay, Hitmaker went with a turn-based system. For the most part, it's pretty solid. Each of your 4 characters can use special dragon skills in addition to magic. You can set this magic yourself, so you get to decide who are your healers or your fighters, for example. You can also set the dragon skills, which makes for some interesting customization. I really wanted to like Dragoneer Zarya, but in the end the game feels too much like a low-budget RPG. The English voice acting is horrid, the graphics look good but are also very bland. The storyline starts great but never picks up and gets very stale right up to the joke of an ending. It's the RPG 101 of generic roleplaying, throwing a few characters on a quest to save the land, make them walk and fight for hours on end, and then abruptly end the game. That pretty much sums it up. Dragon Ball Evolution is the literal definition of shit. There is no way around it. If the movie wasn't bad enough, you got a game to make your way through as well. That would only result in you questioning your sanity. If you've already played any of the Budokai games, then you'll be very familiar with the gameplay. Like those games, you perform moves by button mashing your way to victory. Of course, there are some ups and downs about the button mashing haven here. For the good aspect, you could now perform trademark energy blasts and character specials with the ease of pressing a single button. Since there aren't any long length special techniques or combo specials, you can just mix and mash every attack you can with the same button for a quick win. The bad aspect though is that this game is just too simple and very short. It's likely that you'll win more than you are to lose, since the AI here isn't that threatening or difficult. In fact, it is so simple that you could even play this game blindfolded. The character roster is also very small compared to other fighting games on the PSP, with only 5 being available by default, with a further 6 being unlocked, which are all just as uninteresting as the ones you already have. Like most fighting games, there's a pause menu move list to help beginners learn a few tricks in the game, but all of them aren't that unique. Most of them are basically just a few button mashing attacks and short animated specials. There are some redeeming factors however. Even though it doesn't impact gameplay, the visuals are still an important part to a game. For the background arenas, everything looks wide and open, complete with colourful backdrops, 3D textures and special effects. The downer here is that the background arenas aren't that unique. There's no interactions like there were were with the other DBZ games, so you won't likely see your opponent getting smashed into a mountain or down a canyon, and the 3D character models are just plain bollocks. There is no denying that Dragon Ball Evolution was a commercial flop, and no doubt the uninspired visuals, crappy character design, lame music, lifeless cutscenes, simple gameplay, and weak AI contributed to that fact. If you're a fan of the series, please save yourself and do not get suckered into buying this crap. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about its release. You can follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date, and also join our growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skill Jim, Nano, Steve, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Quinn, Dio, and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining our Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon to gain access to exclusive videos and giveaways for as little as $1 per month, you'll find the links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.